Hello, welcome to the channel. Subscribe, leave a like, and don't forget to write a comment. Enjoy watching.
Let's all cheer for the real star of the family, Dad announced, standing tall with his glass of overpriced red wine raised high like he was on stage at some black tie gala instead of a modest dinner in our suburban living room. His voice rang out with such certainty, such pride, that for a brief moment you could almost forget that only 5 people sat at the table, and that one of them had stopped believing in fairy tales a long time ago. Everyone clapped, of course. That fake, obligatory clapping that families do to avoid looking like they feel differently. My mom smiled, more with her eyes than her mouth. My husband gave a polite nod, used to the script by now. My teenage daughter rolled her eyes discreetly, but not too hard, just enough to show me she noticed. And me? I just nodded, smiled tight, swallowed the lump in my throat like it was just another bite of overcooked roast chicken, and said nothing. Silence, after all, had become my most reliable talent. That was Sunday evening. By Monday morning, everything had started to unravel, and none of us were going to get out clean. The real star Dad was talking about, of course, was Emily, my little sister, the golden girl, the achiever, the one who could fall face first into a pile of mud and still come out looking like she'd just stepped off the cover of a lifestyle magazine. She had just gotten another promotion at her job, some fancy corporate role in New York, where people apparently get paid for having pretty LinkedIn profiles and remembering which wine goes with which buzzword. I had smiled through it all again because that's what I do. But inside I felt that familiar burning ache, half resentment, half grief. For all the years I'd watched her shine while I flickered in the background like a forgotten candle no one had bothered to snuff out. That night, after the dishes were done and everyone had gone home, I sat in my car outside my parents' house longer than I should have, staring at the porch light flickering like it couldn't decide whether to stay on or die out. Just like me. I thought about the look on my mom's face when Emily had shown off her new designer handbag, casually mentioning that her boss insisted she take it as a thank you gift. I caught the way Mom's jaw tensed, barely, the way her hand twitched when she reached for her glass. It wasn't much, but it was something, and after all these years, I've learned to read between the cracks. So I said it, quietly, just once, as we stood in the kitchen away from the others. I leaned in and said, "You know, Mom, not everything Emily touches turns to gold. Some of it, well, it smells more like smoke." She didn't respond. She didn't ask what I meant. She just looked at me like she had just bitten into something sour and didn't know how to spit it out. And then she walked away. Hours later, just after midnight, my phone lit up. "Whatever you said to Mom, she's not okay." That was the whole message from Emily. No greeting, no signature, just that chilling sentence. And that's when I knew that Emily had her feelers up, that she was watching me, that my words, vague as they were, had landed somewhere dangerous. Growing up, Emily had always been the one who made messes with a smile. She once broke Dad's watch and blamed it on me. She flirted with my high school crush just to see if she could get him to dump me. She kissed my college boyfriend at our parents' anniversary party, and then cried her way out of it by claiming I was too possessive. And it always worked. She could set a building on fire and convince everyone it was just an accidental candle spill, while I stood there, soot-faced and silent, holding the matchbox. But I'm not 16 anymore. I'm 39, I've got bills, a mortgage, a husband who mostly looks through me now, and a daughter who thinks I don't understand TikTok or heartbreak. And I've got a gut full of quiet rage that's been simmering for too damn long. So no, Emily, I didn't tell Mom everything. Not even close. But now I'm thinking, maybe I should. Because the truth is, Mom's not the only one who's not okay. And if you want to play games, sis, you better be ready to lose something this time. Let me ask you something. Have you ever been part of a family where one person always shines a little brighter no matter what they do? Where the rest of you just become background noise, polite applause, footnotes to someone else's glory? And have you ever wanted, just once, to stop clapping? Because that was me, Sunday night, still clapping. But not for much longer. The morning after the dinner, I sat alone in the kitchen, staring into a mug of lukewarm coffee that I had reheated twice already, as if somehow forcing heat back into it might warm up the numb space inside me, the space that used to be full of something like hope, or maybe just energy, before it all turned into this tired, relentless ache that comes from pretending everything is fine when it's clearly not. The light coming through the window was sharp and colorless, the kind of cold brightness that only winter mornings can bring, casting long shadows on the linoleum floor and highlighting every smudge and crumb I hadn't bothered to clean. And that's when I read her message again. The same 11 words, no punctuation, no flair, just the digital hiss of Emily slipping through at my phone screen like a cold breath on the back of my neck. Whatever you said to Mom, she's not okay. There's something calculated about a message like that. Not too emotional, not overtly accusatory, just sharp enough to jab you in the ribs while pretending it's concern, and it was so her, so perfectly her, that I could almost hear her voice behind it. Syrupy and smooth, the kind of tone that could turn any sentence into both a compliment and a threat if you weren't careful. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. That silence was my new language now. One that Emily, for all her charm and theatrics, never quite learned to read. But her words rattled me more than I expected. She's not okay. Not mad, not upset, not even confused. No, Emily said Mom was not okay, which meant she saw something in her that she didn't expect, something that scared her enough to reach out, and that, in and of itself, was rare. Emily never reached out unless she wanted to control the story, which meant whatever she saw in Mom must have genuinely unsettled her. And that's when the guilt crept in, uninvited but inevitable, the kind that wraps around your throat slowly, whispering maybe you pushed too far, maybe you should have left well enough alone. Maybe that one sentence you tossed out like a fishing hook in a quiet kitchen now has a life of its own, wriggling through old wounds you didn't mean to reopen. But then I remembered. This wasn't the first time Emily had done something to unsettle Mom. I remembered flashes from our childhood, fragments I'd tucked away like old receipts in a forgotten drawer. There was that time when Emily borrowed Mom's gold necklace, the one Dad gave her on their 10th anniversary, and sold it for cash to buy front-row concert tickets. She was 16. I was already in college. Mom never told Dad. She just cried alone in the laundry room for hours, then pretended for weeks that she must have misplaced it somewhere. Emily promised to pay her back. She never did. That necklace was just one of 100 small heartbreaks my mother swallowed over the years in silence. Later that day, I drove to my parents' house. I didn't call first. I didn't knock. The front door was unlocked, like it always was. Inside, the house smelled faintly of Lysol and burnt toast, the scent of a woman trying to keep order while everything beneath the surface teetered on the edge of collapse. I found Mom in the den, sitting on the old floral couch she never replaced, staring at the blank TV screen like it had betrayed her. Her hands were folded too neatly in her lap, and her shoulders looked hunched in a way that made her seem smaller, like grief had physically bent her. She didn't look up when I walked in, but I saw her eyes flicker in the reflection of the screen. "I didn't mean to upset you," I said softly, cautiously, like I was approaching a wounded animal. She didn't speak for a long time, just kept looking at that dead screen. Then finally she said, "She thinks you hate her." That stopped me cold. "She should worry less about that," I muttered before I could stop myself. "She's got enough people who adore her." Mom flinched like I'd slapped her. Then she looked at me, really looked at me. And for the first time in what felt like years, I saw something behind her eyes that wasn't resignation or politeness. It was fear, not the kind of fear you get when your child fails a test or makes a bad decision. No, this was deeper, sharper, like something was haunting her. "She's not as strong as you think," Mom whispered. "You should be careful." I didn't know what to say to that. What could I say? That I'd spent the better part of my life being careful? That every time Emily took the spotlight, I'd made sure the stage didn't fall out from under her? That I'd hidden truths, covered tracks, played the reliable older sister so well I almost believed the part myself. Instead, I just nodded, my jaw clenched so tight it ached. It wasn't until I got home that I remembered something else, an old voicemail I'd never deleted. One Mom left me months ago by accident, a half-minute of garbled audio I'd never thought twice about. I played it out of instinct, thinking maybe I was losing it. Maybe I needed some proof that I wasn't just stirring up ghosts for the sake of drama. But there it was, buried under the static and the muffled rustle of clothing, a single sentence that changed everything. She can't keep doing this at work. One day someone's going to say something. That voice, my mother's, and the she, well, that could only mean one person. I didn't sleep that night, not really. I lay in bed, body still, mind pulsing, while my husband snored softly beside me, blissfully unaware of the storm building under our roof. The storm that had been slowly gathering strength for decades, unnoticed and ignored, like a leak behind drywall that only makes itself known once the whole ceiling caves in. The voicemail replayed in my mind over and over again, the static, the strained edge in my mother's voice, the way she didn't sound angry or annoyed but terrified, resigned maybe, but mostly terrified. She hadn't meant for me to hear it. That much was clear, which made the words all the more damning. She can't keep doing this at work. Not she made a mistake, not she's in trouble, but she can't keep doing this. As in, it had happened before. As in, she had been covering for something again and again and had finally begun to fear the moment when the facade would collapse and take everyone down with it. By the time morning arrived, my mind was set. Not because I knew what I was looking for, but because I couldn't stand being in the dark anymore. I had spent too many years making myself small, convincing myself that if I didn't ask questions, I wouldn't be blamed for the answers. But that message had cracked something open in me, something raw and unfinished that I hadn't dared to touch in years. I drove to Mom's house without calling, again, because I knew if I gave her time to prepare, she would build a wall I couldn't climb, a wall made of carefully arranged smiles and vague reassurances, and the kind of maternal deflections that she'd mastered long before I even learned to speak. The house was quieter than usual, the kind of heavy quiet that feels like a warning rather than a peace. She was in the kitchen this time, sitting at the table with her hands wrapped around a teacup that had gone cold. Her eyes looked puffy, like she hadn't slept either, and her posture, always so upright, so composed, had slackened in a way that made her look older, as if she'd aged years in the space of a single day. I didn't wait. I just sat down across from her and placed my phone on the table between us. "I heard your message," I said, keeping my voice even, low but firm. "I need to know what she's doing, what you've been covering." For a moment, she didn't move. Then her eyes flicked down to the phone, then back up to me, and I saw something shift in her expression. Not anger, not fear exactly, but exhaustion, the kind that comes from carrying too much for too long, and finally realizing your arms are too tired to hold on any longer. "She's not well, Laura," she said, and her voice cracked like dry wood under pressure. "She hasn't been for a long time." I waited, giving her space, even though every second felt like a century, because I knew from experience that rushing her would only send her deeper into her shell. There was an incident," Mom finally continued, her voice trembling as she stared into the untouched tea like it held answers she didn't want to give. "At her job, HR got involved. She had a relationship with someone she supervised." I blinked, the words sinking in like slow poison. "She was reported," Mom added, quieter now. "But nothing came of it. Her boss, he's a friend of your father's, they buried it." I leaned back, the chair creaking under me, the weight of her words settling over my chest perhaps like a stone. It wasn't just about favoritism anymore. It wasn't just about Emily being the golden child, the attention sponge, the family star. This was about damage. This was about manipulation. This was about consequences that never arrived because someone else always stepped in to pay the toll. "And you said nothing?" I asked, not with accusation but disbelief, because even after everything, even after all the silences, the little betrayals, the passive glances, I still hadn't expected this. What was I supposed to do? Mom snapped, the sudden sharpness in her voice like glass breaking. Let your father find out. Watch him crumble. She would have lost everything, her job, her reputation, her future. And what about me? I asked, the words flying out before I could stop them. What did I have to lose before someone noticed I existed? She stared at me then, long and hard, and for the first time I saw something close to shame in her eyes. Not guilt, not regret, but actual shame. The heavy, hollow kind that sticks to your bones and never quite washes off. She always needed more help than you, she said finally. You were always stronger. It wasn't a compliment. It was a confession, an explanation, a justification for every time she'd looked the other way. Every time she'd asked me to understand, to be patient, to be the one who compromised. And maybe she believed it. Maybe she really thought she'd been protecting Emily all these years. Or maybe she just didn't know how to love two daughters in the same way and had chosen the one who screamed louder. I left the house without saying anything more, the echo of her voice trailing behind me like smoke, wrapping itself around my thoughts as I got back in my car and sat there, motionless, watching the same porch light flicker against the daylight like it couldn't decide what kind of day it wanted to be. But the worst part, the part that chilled me more than the truth itself, wasn't what my mother had said. It was the name she hadn't, because there had been a man involved, a man Emily supervised, a man she had an inappropriate relationship with. And somewhere deep in my gut, before I even opened the message history or pulled up his profile or allowed my brain to make the connection my heart had already made, I knew exactly who that man was. My ex. The one who left me without warning. The one who said he didn't know how to love someone who always made him feel second. The one Emily swore she barely knew. It's funny, in a sick stomach-turning kind of way, how clarity comes not like a sunrise, but like a car crash, loud, jarring, and all at once. I didn't even have to confirm it, not really. I didn't need to search old photos or dig up archived texts or scroll through tagged posts to verify what my gut already knew with bone-deep certainty. The timing, the proximity, the patterns, all of it lined up like a cruel little joke played at my expense, a punchline that had been brewing for years while I kept pretending that the past was a closed door. Jason. Of course it had been him, my ex, the one who left without any logical reason, the one who ghosted not just me but the version of myself I had built around that relationship, dismantling years of effort with a handful of vague excuses about needing space and feeling trapped, as if love was a cage and I had been the warden. At the time, I had blamed myself, the way women are trained to. Was I too much, too serious, too needy, not fun enough, not flexible, not exciting? But now, in the sick light of truth, I saw the real reason, and it wasn't about me at all. He had been sleeping with Emily. I could almost hear the voice inside me muttering, "I told you so." That bitter internal narrator who had always whispered doubts whenever Emily claimed she and Jason were just friendly, that they barely knew each other, that I was being paranoid for wondering why he had suddenly started dodging our family events, or why his phone always seemed to ring when she was around. At the time, it seemed like petty jealousy. Now it felt like instinct being drowned out by denial. And worse than the betrayal, worse than the lying, was the realization that I had stayed quiet for so long, had played nice for so long, had smiled and nodded and swallowed my rage just to keep the peace in a family that never once returned the favor. But I was done playing nice. The next day, I reached out to Jason under a pretense so thin it barely qualified as a lie. Just a simple message asking if he'd be willing to meet up for coffee to talk. An innocent enough phrase that no man ever questions, especially not one with a guilty conscience. He agreed within minutes. We met at a little cafe downtown, one of those places where everything is overpriced and underseasoned, and no one asks questions because everyone's too busy pretending to be important. He looked older, slightly tired around the eyes, like whatever shine Emily had sprinkled on him had worn off fast. He smiled, awkward and small, like he wasn't sure what I wanted, like maybe I had finally come around to forgiving him. I didn't waste time. Was it worth it? I asked, before the drinks even arrived, my tone calm, level, almost polite. He blinked. What do you mean? Sleeping with her, risking your job, letting her ruin your reputation. Was it worth it? His face went pale in stages, like watching a building's power go out floor by floor. You don't know what you're talking about, he muttered, but the shake in his voice told me otherwise. Mom told me everything, I said. A lie, technically, but one I knew he'd believe because Jason had always been terrified of older women. Mothers, bosses, therapists, anyone who could see straight through his bullshit. He sank into the chair like a deflated balloon, covering his face with his hand. It was a mistake, a stupid one-time, well, two-time mistake. She said she'd handle it. Of course she did, I said flatly. No emotion because I wasn't there to comfort him. I wasn't even there for answers, not really. I was there to take something back. Control, maybe, or just the satisfaction of watching a man squirm under the weight of his own cowardice. She promised no one would find out, he added, almost pleading now, like I could absolve him. Well, someone did, I said, standing up. And now it's my turn. I left him sitting there, jaw slack, guilt steaming off him like heat from pavement after a summer storm. But I didn't go home. I drove straight to Mom's, sat in the driveway for 10 minutes, and sent Emily a message. She's talking. You should go see her. Now. A lie, yes, but a useful one. Emily, being Emily, would never pass up the chance to control the narrative before it escaped her hands. She replied within seconds. On my way. I waited. I watched. She arrived 10 minutes later, storming into the house without knocking, her heels clicking on the porch like the sound of polished daggers. I stayed in my car, engine off, windows cracked just enough to hear voices if they got loud. And they did. Not all at once, but in fragments, through the thin walls and the winter air. I trusted you, Mom's voice trembling. You said you wouldn't say anything. Emily panicked, rising. I didn't. She figured it out. Then something crashed. Something glass, maybe a cup or a vase, then a pause, then footsteps, then silence. A kind of silence that doesn't feel empty, but heavy like it's holding its breath. Then suddenly a scream. It was sharp, shrill, not one of pain exactly, but of pure emotional rupture, rage, despair, guilt, all braided together. And then nothing. I stayed frozen in the driver's seat, unsure what to do, unsure what I had set in motion. Had Emily hurt her? Had Mom finally snapped? Or had they both come undone in ways that no one would be able to glue back together? My phone buzzed. A text. From Emily. No words. Just a photo. It was the picture of the three of us, Mom, Emily, and me, from that same family dinner. The one where Dad toasted her as the real star of the family. The caption said, "Still clapping?" That's when I knew, whatever I'd started, it wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The sky the morning after didn't quite look like winter, but it didn't carry the promise of spring either. It just hung there in that strange, colorless purgatory that never quite warms or brightens, as if the world itself was holding its breath, waiting to see who would move first and what the consequences might be. I sat alone in my kitchen again, the mug of coffee cooling rapidly between my hands, though this time I didn't bother reheating it. The night before had left me raw in a way I hadn't experienced since childhood, not in the crying on the floor way, not in the theatrical, teary mess my sister might have crafted for an audience, but in that stripped, skeletal kind of way where everything feels too quiet, like someone turned the volume down on your life and you haven't quite figured out how to turn it back up. I kept thinking about that scream, the sound of it cutting through silence like a bone snapping under pressure, followed by that cold, cruel photo Emily had sent. Our family's happy facade, frozen in time, and distorted by everything we now knew was a lie. There had been no word from Mom after that. No texts, no calls. Her phone went to voicemail. Her house remained locked. And even Dad seemed unaware, or maybe just unwilling to acknowledge what had happened. I didn't rush over. I didn't call hospitals. Something in me resisted the urge to fix, to soothe, to salvage. I had done enough salvaging over the years, cleaning up messes I hadn't made, swallowing truths I shouldn't have, carrying blame that was never mine to begin with. And now, after all that, the idea of rushing to the scene felt less like love and more like surrender. So instead, I waited. And it didn't take long. 2 days later, Dad announced, proud and clueless as ever, that we'd all be getting together again for dinner, a family reset, he called it, as if trauma could be wiped clean with a roast and some polite conversation. The message came through the family group chat, one he barely knew how to use, but insisted on keeping alive, like some digital thread binding us together, even when everything else had frayed beyond recognition. No mention of Emily's visit to Mom, no questions about the scream, no inquiry about why half the group hadn't spoken to each other since that night. Just a simple note. Sunday dinner, same time, everyone there. I almost didn't go, but then I remembered that Emily would be there too. And if there was one thing I knew for sure, it was that you don't leave a story half finished, especially not when you've worked this hard to wrestle the pen from someone else's hand. When I arrived, the house looked exactly the same. Same shrubs trimmed too tightly, same cracked stone walkway, same doorbell that let out a high-pitched chirp instead of a chime. But something in the air was undeniably different, like the atmosphere itself was waiting for something to snap. Emily was already there, sitting in her usual spot at the dining table, smiling that too-perfect smile that used to charm strangers and now only made my skin crawl. She wore a crisp white blouse and red lipstick, the kind of outfit that screamed confidence but reeked of overcompensation. Dad was bustling around in the kitchen, humming tunelessly, and Mom was nowhere to be seen. "She's resting," Emily said when I asked, her voice smooth, rehearsed. "Didn't sleep well?" I looked at her, and she met my gaze with an expression so empty it was almost serene. No guilt, no fear, just that cold, glinting assurance she always carried when she thought she had the upper hand. Dinner began like every other, chatter, wine, awkward smiles, but the air between us crackled with tension so thick I was certain even my father felt it, though he kept barreling through with small talk and stories from work, refusing to acknowledge the emotional landmines surrounding him. And then, just as I expected, he raised his glass again. "To my girls," he said, voice booming with forced joy. "And especially to Emily, who always manages to shine brightest no matter what's going on." I could feel my blood slow in my veins, not from shock. I had heard the same toast a dozen times, but from the weight of what I knew now, from the way his words floated over the truth like a tarp tossed over a crime scene. And I smiled, but not the way I usually did. This time I stood up gently, slowly, and raised my own glass. "Actually," I said, my voice calm but cutting through the room like a blade wrapped in silk, "why don't we toast to family secrets instead?" Everyone froze. Emily's fork paused midair. Dad blinked. The silence was immediate and sharp. "Secrets?" he asked, half laughing, already nervous. I looked at Emily. She didn't flinch. "To the things we don't say," I continued, "to the things we hide, to the mistakes we cover for, to the lies we let live because it's easier than the truth." Emily set her fork down carefully. "This again?" she said, her voice laced with practiced exasperation. I turned to Dad. "Did you know she almost got fired?" I asked softly. "That she manipulated someone under her supervision, slept with him, and then let Mom threaten his silence?" The words hung in the air like smoke. No one spoke. Dad looked confused. Emily's jaw tightened, and I just stood there holding my glass, watching the edges of my world begin to buckle. "She's lying," Emily said finally, her tone flat, deadpan, desperate. But Mom chose that moment to appear. She entered the room slowly, eyes tired, shoulders slumped, but there was something about her presence that silenced even Emily. She didn't speak, didn't explain, just placed a manila envelope on the table in front of my father, nodded once, and walked out. No one moved for a full minute. Eventually, Dad opened the envelope. I didn't stay to watch him read it. I didn't need to, because I'd already read every page. Emails, reports, screenshots, proof. Outside, the air was colder than I remembered, and for the first time in a long time, I felt lighter. Not happy, not vindicated, just less heavy. Later that night, my phone buzzed. Another message from Emily. This time it said, "I know what you did, and I'm not finished." I stared at the screen for a long time, thumb hovering over the reply button, heart steady. Because maybe she wasn't finished, but neither was I. And for once, the stage wasn't hers anymore.